Direction Point! Direction Point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason. As always, this show opens with music from City of Death, composed by Dudley Simpson, and the show closes with music from Dudley Simpson for the Ambassadors of Death. Given that City of Death was not novelized during the original Target run from the 1970s through 1990s, that means there is only 1 week in the history of Doctor Who literature where my intro or outro music is appropriate to the episode being aired, and that week is this week. Episode 120, Book 121, The Ambassadors of Death, the first Doctor Who serial to add the cliffhanger sting to the closing credits. Just all around one of my absolute favorite stories. Long-time listeners of this podcast know how much I love Ambassadors, and this week you will find out exactly how much. I could not be happier to introduce my two guests for the week. That's right, for the second week in a row, following on the heels of episode 120A, K9 and Company, featuring the two guys from Who and Company. This week I have a husband and wife team of Doctor Who literature authors, Kate Orman and Jonathan Blum, author of several new adventures from Kate, and then Eighth Doctor adventures from Kate and Jon, as well as lots of other Doctor Who material from the two of them, which they will talk about during the interview. The three of us will dig deep into Ambassadors. We are also going to play, as we did last week, a two-fisted game of 20 questions, one story for each guest. Just a couple of quick programming notes before we get to it. You can find all episodes of the show on whatever podcatcher you use. I am hosted on Spotify. Very helpful to me if you subscribe to the show and or auto-download new episodes, so the show is waiting for you every Sunday. I am also streaming on YouTube with the podcast audio and occasional animated videos from Jim Sangster. That is under Doctor Who Literature or at Doctor Who Novels, Dr. Who Novels on YouTube. Also very helpful to the show. If you subscribe, you can set a push notification so you know exactly when new episodes drop. You can also reach out to me directly at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature at gmail.com. Let me know how much you're enjoying the show. And you can also leave a review of your choice on Apple Podcasts or comments on the YouTube channel. Very excited to hear from my listeners, and I'm also very excited to feature this week's show. After the usual trailer from another Doctor Who podcast on the Direction Point Network, we'll have the interview with John and Kate, and then following that, my review of the novelization of Doctor Who and the Ambassadors of Death. Let's get to it.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Witt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Alison Fitz-Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. Enjoy your travels.
All right, coming to us live from down under in Australia, it is Kate Orman and John Blum. Guys, welcome back to Doctor Who Literature.
Hey,
Hello.
hi! Nice to be back.
John, the last time I had you on was for my Legopolis episode, and that was at least a year ago. And the last time I had you on together was for Talons of Weng Chiang, so that was probably about 2 years ago.
Wow.
God, has it been that long?
Time has flown.
Yeah.
This is now, we're coming up on the third anniversary of this podcast, so I can barely remember the early days.
Yeah, and you're rapidly running out of books here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the
I
last
know.
Pertwee one, isn't it?
This is the final Pertwee novelization.
Yeah.
Wow. Whatever, or the last one that you've covered?
No, it's the
la-
last
well,
one that they did. Yeah.
Not
Wow.
counting the final book in the Target range, which is Paradise of Death, which is the novelization of the 1990s Pertwee audio with the Peter Howell theme music, which may or may not count as
Oh.
canon, but I will be covering it as the final episode of this show.
Okay.
Yeah, the episode that kills your podcast.
The episode that almost killed my fandom, but we'll come to that when the episode comes up. So, John, last time that I had you on, you were about to release the last of the Lethbridge Stewart Candy Jar novels, and the last time I had Kate on, you were about to release your first Big Finish novel. Now, both of you, of course, I'm sure have been a lot more prolific since then, so what have you fellas been up to since last you were on my little show?
Well, I've been doing a lot of writing, but the only thing that I've actually got out the door is a story in IZ Digital, which is the digital branch of Interzone, which is a story called Saltier, which I'm extremely proud of.
It's good.
Thank you.
Proper endorsement there, yeah.
Lots of other stuff that is still, in progress.
If you send me a link to what you have out, I can put it in the show notes and my audience can
smashing.
access.
Right, must
Cool.
remember to do that.
As for me, after putting out the last Lethbridge Stewart novel, I immediately put out the novel after that. My book got split into 2 volumes called United Nations and Intelligence Task Force. And the first one came out last November. The second one is just out now in the UK. It's so new that I haven't even got my author copy yet.
Oh, wow.
So that's what's going on right there. And this is the big founding of UNIT story, which is why and the Ambassadors podcast is coming at a great time, I guess.
Yeah.
That was a huge task. What happened was that we had written one book. He said I could go a bit long because it was the big finale. Then I handed in the draft, and he said, okay, not quite that long. I'd written basically the books are normally 70,000 words. I submitted one that was about 90,000. He was hoping for 80,000. We went through it, cutting down. We realized that the cuts are actually hurting the book, and I said, there's all this other stuff in the outline that we never got around to writing because it wouldn't fit. I could put that back in. We could make it 2 books. I mean, to be fair, I did have COVID at the time, so there's some excuse for me doing something so unprofessional. Normally, you will get laughed at if you suggest something like that, but it actually helped make Andy's schedule easier, so he said, okay, make it 2 books. So I had to write about another half book at short notice to get a second book out there, and Intelligence Task Force is now out, and that's the grand conclusion of the story of the founding of UNIT. Beyond that, the other thing that I've just put out recently is a Big Finish audio. For the first time in, a couple of decades, I have done a Big Finish story. It's included in the latest Fifth Doctor box set called Meanwhile Turlough, and it's a bonus download. Basically, it was built on the premise of, you know how in a lot of Turlough's stories, he tends to get parked in a subplot somewhere and sort of only catches up with the main action later on.
Yes.
So like there's one time where I believe the entire universe nearly ends while he's stuck in some ducting somewhere back in Terminus. So I had the idea of doing a story in which, in the midst of a big slam bang Eric Sayard action epic, Turlough runs across a crisis that's personal for him. And while all this chaos is going on in the background of the Doctor, Turlough has to save his own ass. And it's one of those things he can't necessarily bring the Doctor in on. So it's a fun little piece there. I had an absolute whale of a time writing it, and that just came out just a couple months ago, I think it was. And so it's a delight to actually be back in that. I've got more stuff that I'm working on now. Nothing that's set in stone, so I can't actually talk about anything that hasn't been officially commissioned and announced yet. But I'm also, strangely enough, doing something that I'll talk about a little later on in terms of that involves the idea of adaptation, because I'm basically in the middle of something which is really making me sympathize with Terrence Dicks.
Now, my teenage daughter and I just finished our marathon rewatch of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We did 144 episodes in about 144 days. 2 weeks ago on this podcast, I had the first half of my conversation with her talking through seasons 1 through 5, and then I have our discussion of seasons 6 through 7, including the musical, which will be aired at a later date the next time I don't have any other episode to put out. But the episode, the Zeppo in season 3 is the episode, it's the annual apocalypse, but Xander is stuck in his own subplot. So I have to ask, in Meanwhile Turlo, does Turlo get busy with Eliza Dushku?
I'm sure he would be absolutely thrilled to. He wasn't scared that she didn't have a hidden agenda. But no, it was one of those cases where I came up with the idea of doing it and then realized afterwards that that's a bit like the Zeppo. But in terms of the actual way in which it goes down, it's much more different. It's much different from that because Turlo is, as you know, a very sneaky and manipulative character. He's trying to play things on his own angle. And this is a case where it gets a bit out of control. So so it's not, I mean, I absolutely adore the Zeppo, and the general reactions of Xander throughout that are still hilarious. But it's not quite so much of a comedy, though he does have some very funny attitudes towards the Doctor and T, which I hope come out well.
I want to make clear, to quote Terrence Dix for the second time in the first 8 minutes of this episode, as Terrence Dix said, you need to have a good idea, but it needn't be your good idea. There is nothing wrong with starting from the Zeppo.
Yeah, I think he got that quote from Mac Hulk, actually. So
You have to have a good quote, but it needn't be your good quote.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those cases where it's sort of parallel evolution, I think.
I had not been aware of that. My Big Finish is very, very behind because, number one, there's so much content. You really have to pick your spots. And secondly, with the Big Finish website famously going offline last week and staying offline for a very long time, I couldn't have found it even if I wanted to.
Okay, well, to be fair, it's basically, since it's included as part of a box set, finding the story is very tricky. It's not quite down the stairs, stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign saying "Beware of the leopard," to quote someone else for a change. But what you need to do is buy the Fifth Doctor box set Dreamtime, for which Meanwhile Turlo is the bonus story. Apparently, what the thinking is that Dreamtime the Dream Team, I think it's called. Sorry, my bad. But that one features Tegan and Nissa and Adric and that bunch, and they threw in a Turlo story so you could collect the whole set, I think.
Dream
Dan
Time sounds like a prequel to Snake Dance, I was going to say.
No, Dream Time was different entirely. That was that a Mark Platt story? I can't remember. Sorry, my grip on Big Finish's output is similarly loose, simply because I cannot keep up with a fire hose.
It's encyclopedic, isn't it?
Yes. But yes, it is the Fifth Doctor box set that was released in early 2024. That should at least help people narrow it down, even if I've got the name wrong again.
I will link to that in the show notes, assuming the Big Finish website is operational by the time I push this episode out in a few days.
Yeah.
What happened to the website?
They redesigned it, and hilarity ensued.
Oh, no. Oh, dear. Yeah, it happens to all of us.
I went on last night to check something, and it appears to at least be up. I don't know how well anything works on it, but you can at least get to things and click on things through the various ranges.
Oh, good.
So you should have a reasonable chance.
See, we know that Big Finish has a penchant for exploring the past. Their website revamp played out much like the Doctor's revamp of the TARDIS console in Part 1 of The Horns of Nimon, complete with comic explodey sound effects.
I can see that.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. Well, that's what you get when you do all your special effects on video rather than film.
Well, there you go.
So, speaking of comical mishaps, you guys are aware that I lost my entire collection of all 61 New Adventures last year.
Yes, and we still have copies of ours that we can get to you next time that we are on the same continent.
I've got about 7 books to go. Most of them are Kate's, but I saw a link. I am now the moderator of the New Adventures group on Facebook, and somebody posted a link a couple of weeks ago for a used bookstore in the west coast of America selling damaged goods for well below market rate. So I immediately clicked on the tile, ordered the book. The book arrives earlier this week. I excitedly opened the box. I cut open the packaging, and I got the book, the wrong book. I got a copy of Craig Hinton's God Engine, which is not quite the same level as Russell T. Davies' Damaged Goods.
That's not damaged goods.
Plus, I had it already. But I then went on
Insult to
eBay
injury.
in anger and I found another below market copy of Damaged Goods, which I ordered, and that arrived yesterday, and it actually arrived as the correct book.
Wow.
Oh, well, hurrah.
That's wonderful there. And so one of these days we really must revisit Damaged Goods. I mean, it's a bit of a
Oh,
different...
I've been meaning to reread that for yonks.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm just going to get the cat out of here before he causes chaos. Come on, sweetheart.
Yeah, so we figured we should just put our two cats on and let them conduct the interview for a change.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Good boy.
Smudge is
Good
the
boy.
official podcat of Doctor Who literature, so I'm sure she would enjoy that.
Well, I think we now use Lucky as our agent because of his willingness to bite. So,
I know that Big Finish also did an audio adaptation of Damaged Goods, although I don't have that either. I may as well get that at the same time that I get John's Turlo audio.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Johnny Morris did the adaptation and had to tone a few bits down for the modern Who audience.
I suppose you'd have to, wouldn't you?
Yeah, there's less cocaine. It's a fictional
There's
drug.
less cocaine, okay.
It's a fictional drug now that's involved with it, yeah.
Right, okay.
But what I'd forgotten about Damaged Goods is the first chapter takes place in 1980s New York City. And I had completely forgotten that, but it's like walking around my own city with a time machine.
Yeah. Wow, that's bizarre. I mean, the last the real last Lethbridge Stewart book, as you're probably aware, there were sequences set in 70s New York City, which were running off my childhood memories there. So I know how evocative that can sort of be to just have something that hits the few remaining brain cells you have that actually lived through that time. It's amazing. Yeah.
I remember when you were in the planning stages of that book, you asked me to go to the UN and look at certain bits of architecture, but the UN was closed for public tours due to COVID, so I was never able to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's okay. Things worked out all right. The advice you did give me was very helpful, and I hope you did. I assume I sent you the manuscripts for the 2-book version at some point.
It is sitting on my Kindle, yes.
Because you are thanked in it. So just let you all know.
Yay.
Which means I also have to get the hard copy now because I like to have a hard copy of all the books that have my name in it, including Return of the Living Dead. Plug.
Yeah, that makes
Another reason for us to get it to you, I guess. So yeah, we have been very busy campers, all of us of late, I'd say.
So I really want to talk about Ambassadors of Death. It's one of my favorite Pertwees, and I know it must be one of John's because there's an audio cue from Ambassadors of Death in your 1990s 7th Doctor fan video Time Rift.
Oh my God, I'd forgotten we actually had that in there. I think that's not in the... We didn't have the balls to put that in the DVD version, but yeah, we actually, at one point we used the unit theme, as I recall.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, but we replaced it with Neil Marsh's unit theme, which I think worked really well there. Yeah. And also, we also, I think, used the original Master theme at some point in that too. So that's my Dudley Simpson things were satisfied. When I got to meet Dudley Simpson, in fact, I actually thanked him. I said I thought the Ambassadors of Death was a really groovy score. I believe I actually used the word groovy, and yes. And I don't know if he really remembered what he did on it there, but the style of this story on screen, I absolutely adored the perfect 1970s-ness. It's right at that intersection between the 60s and the 70s where you can still do the sort of Danger Man style thing of having an action harpsichord piece, which I find delightful. And that the style of Ambassadors is it was always a delight. I remember even from the first time I watched it, it really had this great vibe that combined. It was that incredible 1970s futurism there, and what the director brought to it, what the actors brought to it, and the sheer twistedness of the script as it keeps turning itself on its head every episode or two. I adored this story. And I was really looking forward to seeing what Terrence would do when he finally got to grips with it, because famously Terrence found it a very frustrating story to work on, and I just wanted to see, okay, what would he do with this thing when he finally got to this after novelizing everything else.
So, to give the basic background facts behind the Ambassadors of Death, which most of my audience probably knows by heart, but I'll give a brief summary here. This was a commission for David Whittaker, who had been the Doctor Who writer of the 1960s. Season 7 was being planned in 1969, so it is still the 60s when he is contracted. Terrence Dicks had told Malcolm Hulke what the new format of the show was. Malcolm Hulke says, whoops, now you're down to exactly 2 stories, Alien Invasion and Mad Scientist. So Ambassadors of Death is the inversion of the Alien Invasion story, where the invaders are the good guy and the bad guys are the humans. Hence the fascist General Carrington being the main villain of the story. David Whittaker, however, was not up to writing the new format for the show. After 3 drafts, Terrence Dicks says, this just isn't working. Let's pay him in full and credit him. But somebody else is going to have to write this thing. Uh-oh, I'm the only person in the office. I'm going to have to write it. So he writes episode 1, says nuts to this, hands it off to Trevor Ray. Trevor Ray writes episode 2 and then quits. Malcolm Hulke, who had just written all 7 episodes of the previous story, then comes in and writes episodes 3 through 7. So this is basically a Malcolm Hulke story, semi-plotted by David Whittaker and co-written by 2 other people, which explains why so many characters go in and out of the first few episodes. You have a whole subplot about hired goons used by General Carrington who get a lot of material in episodes 1 and 2 and then are never seen or heard from again.
That's
and
right.
Then Ralph Cornish's assistant in part 1, who is delightfully lovely, vanishes after part 2 and is replaced by a different assistant in the back half of the story. So the wheels are coming off when you watch Ambassadors of Death. And then after all that, let me ask you the Darren Mooney question. And this is from the 250 podcast, which covers the IMDb's top 250 movies. I am adapting it for Doctor Who. Kate, first, does Ambassadors of Death belong on a list of the best 60 Doctor Who TV stories of Doctor Who's first 60 years?
Wow, what a question. What a question. I don't think it does. It's too long and too, I don't know if padded is exactly the right word, but it doesn't really hold up. It's got great elements, but there's an awful stretch between them, and then there's an awful lot of escaping and going back into that blasted bunker. So, no, I wouldn't put it on. I don't know how I would come up with a list of the top 60 stories, because that's a lot of stories, but I have a feeling it wouldn't sneak in there.
If we're talking about the top 60 of just the old show, I think it could get in there. It would not be near the very top there, but I mean, at 26 years, 60 stories, you're looking at a couple of stories a year. I'd say that you could Ambassadors of Death. It would not make it to the kind of like worshipped all-time classic list there. But I think what it has is it's got a sparkle to it, and that's something that I found on screen. There was that tremendous energy to it, which basically, in a way that's less Terrence Dicks and more Robert Holmes, it just sort of zooms you past all the stumbles and the plot holes and so forth. And the thing that you're talking about with the general last minute chaos, I suspect is actually one of the reasons why I admire the story so much, because it is literally down at the point where by the time that Mac Hulke ends up having to write the last episodes, they have already done the scene the breakdowns of the episodes that they need for like things like how much location shooting can we have, which sets can we use, and he is having to write around these requirements that are already in place in this technical, complicated way, trying to work with what they've already started developing, because he is basically climbing onto a speeding train in order to slam the brakes on it. And I'm just in awe of the not just the combination of technical skill and inspired desperation, I think. So if I had a list of 60 stories there, I think Ambassadors would be on it, but it might be number 59.
So for me, I actually, and this is one of the neck-beardiest things that I've ever done, not involving baseball fandom, but I sat down last year because I pitched a panel for Li Who, August 2023, called Doctor Who 60 for 60. And the panel got accepted, and I was made the moderator. Whoops, now I actually have to have my own top 60 list. Otherwise, this panel is going to be an hour of a test pattern being shown to the audience.
Yeah.
So I was in Baltimore for work for a week, and I had a lot of downtime in my hotel overlooking the Inner Harbor. So I went through the entire episode guide of Doctor Who, which at that point was Unearthly Child, all the way through The Power of the Doctor. And I said for each story, is this a great story, yes or no? And I came up with my top 99. I then narrowed it down, narrowed it down, and by the end of the week, I had 60 stories in order, number 60 through number 1. I did a separate episode of Doctor Who Literature, which aired in November 2023. I got Sean Lyon, a mutual friend of ours, and from Gallifrey 1, to come up with his own top 60, and we both revealed our top 60 in the same episode. So for me, Ambassadors of Death is actually not only in the top 60, but it is my number 6. I have it in Pertwee here. In Pertwee terms, it's ahead of Green Death, but below Inferno. Although thinking about it, probably Green Death should be ahead of Inferno, but that's where I had it last summer. And I'll tell you why Ambassadors is number 6. I acknowledge all the flaws in the plotting and the pacing. I know, John, when you and I were debating this story on Rec Arts 30 years ago, your point is that episode 7 is kind of flat. Not a lot happens in it. There's no real great twist in episode 7. So in terms of plotting, this is not exactly City of Death. This is not exactly The Curse of Fenric. But I think you said style. For me, it is the style that grabbed me when I was 16 years old watching this story in 7 parts on PBS. Side note, when my PBS station, Channel 21 on Long Island, was showing the Pertwee era, they had a problem with the 7-parters because they didn't have enough time in the time slot. So they would show episodes 1 through 4 episodic on week 1, and then they would show episodes 4 through 7 on week 2. So Silurians took 2 weeks, Ambassadors took 2 weeks, Inferno took 2 weeks just to fit the time slot. But that means that episode 4 airs twice. So in July 1990, they air episodes 1 through 4 on a Saturday night. The following week, they air episode 4 again, episode 5, episode 6, and then they air episode 4 for the 3rd time in 8 days. And they quickly realized...
The extended disco remix of Ambassadors.
It is.
And they yanked the tape, and they finally played all of episode 7. But I watched episode 4 3 times in 8 days, and I watched the whole thing each time.
That's hilarious.
But what works for me about Ambassadors is the Dudley Simpson music. So the outro music to this podcast is the unit harpsichord score. And when I'm listening back to the episodes, I find myself every week listening to the full minute of that music because it is just so groovy, to coin a phrase.
It's the theme from the unit TV series that never happened.
You have really great set pieces like the Bessie magnetizing the bad guys. You have... And Michael Ferguson is a phenomenal director. We'll come back to that. He has this full-size attack sequence of a convoy with a full-size shuttlecraft, which gets cannibalized and remade the following year for The Mind of Evil by a different director. And you have John Abineri, who's the only actor in the entire Doctor Who universe to have been cast by Francis Ford Coppola in a major movie, giving a terrific performance as the bad guy. So for me, even though the story as a whole is less than the sum of its parts, the individual, and we haven't even gotten to Cyril Shaps yet or William Dysart, the individual parts of the story are so enjoyable for me that I can watch it on a surface level minute by minute and always be entertained, even if it doesn't bear much closer scrutiny. So in terms of enjoyment, that's what I have it in between Pyramids of Mars and the Seeds of Doom. For me, it's an absolute comfort watch.
Wonderful.
I can absolutely understand that. And I think Comfort Watch is probably a lot of what it does for me as well. I think it's really funny also that it was episode 4 of all things that you got repeated, because as we discovered while we were looking through the novelization, the episode 4 is the one that's the most cut in this one here. I think Terrence was sick of it too.
Now we know where he was now in July 1990, watching episode 4 3 times in 8 days.
Yeah.
That would explain it.
So I've mentioned individual bits of the story. If you guys want to jump in, talk about Michael Ferguson's direction, talk about Cyril Shaps, talk about William Dysart, and I'll give you an opener. I believe it is Rob Shearman and Toby Haydock in Running Through Corridors. They specifically say, I think this is volume 2, that the character of Regan must have been an inspiration for Terrence Dicks to invent the Master, a tall, dark, and handsome humanoid figure that the Doctor can banter with while aliens are running around in the margins of the story, who is out for himself but is so evil that you love to hate him.
That's a very interesting point there. I mean, I thought they did a really good job of keeping Regan both charming and like genuinely thuggish. I mean, you got to admit the guy has style. He kills off his own henchmen just for basically for the hell of it, to have a couple of stray bodies to mislead the police, and just has this incredibly slick scene where he then buries them in the sand at the gravel pit there, and then just basically runs off whistling, switching the disguise on his truck. It's a stylish villain performance there, but he has that bit of a twinkle, while at the same time, as I think we noticed earlier, he's also incredibly brutal. I mean, there's that one scene I think you noticed, Kate, in there where he basically has a gun up under Liz's chin.
This was something I really wondered about reading the novelization. My assumption was the novelization is going to be for kids. There's a fair bit of gun violence going on in the television story, so it will be gentled down for children. And when you get to that first big gun battle, when you get to that first big gun battle, the brigadier realizes that the other guys are trying not to shoot them, or at least trying not to harm them. And so you have this huge gun battle, but with nobody actually getting shot or killed. And I thought, well, there it is. The book is saying, oh, look, there are guns here, but we're going to be nice to the children. But then you get those brutal moments where Regan sticks his gun up underneath Liz's chin, and he even pulls her hair back in the book, which he doesn't do on the screen. He sticks his gun in the doctor's temple, and again, that's not in the televised story. What else did I scribble down on my cheat sheet? I think there comes a point where Terence possibly gets sick of dealing with the gun violence because people just start getting shot. And he doesn't make a horrible point out of it, but the two people are, quote, shot down, unquote, in the space of about one page. So there's an awful lot of people's guns being shot out of their hands. I bet that doesn't really happen in real life. And there's also the word destroyed instead of killed at one point. The aliens destroy the security guards. And so, again, there's this clash between what you might think of as sort of bowdlerizing it slightly for children, but actually also being quite brutal. And so if Regan is partly the inspiration for the Master, well, the Master is quite similar in that he's very suave, but he'll also zap you with his horrible weapon, given the slightest excuse. So
yeah, it's like, that's one of the things always about the Delgado Master is that he was, while you got the sense, that from the performance that he's a guy who would conquer the world, but he wouldn't hurt a woman because that wouldn't be fair. Except then you realize that he's also the one who's literally going to cut Joe Grant's heart out as a sacrifice. So there is actually a lot more nastiness there than the performance would tend to. The charmingness kind of fools you. Yeah. I don't know about him as an influence on the Master, though, because one of the things that struck me is that he does seem to have wandered in from a much more earthbound cop show kind of situation there. Like, this is a guy who it would be, as a character who would not be out of place in something like what Special Branch or the Sweeney, the early 70s cop shows. Not the full-on misogyny of some of the later stuff that like the Sweeney would do, but
it's the turtleneck. He looks like a villain, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he gets into Savile Row suit at one point there. He's sort of shift there, but yeah, he does have that thing, and they've got thugs who are pure like Sweeney offcuts.
Yeah.
And so it's this sudden lurch from Doctor Who into another genre apart from the sort of space age stuff that it's doing. Suddenly it's in the kind of territory you could see in a cop show. But it is a fascinating performance, and it is charming. I do love the way he basically just gives him the solution and says, "You will remember who thought of it, don't you?" It's a neat little performance there. I don't know if it's the Master, but what it is, I think, is unique and really striking. But you mentioned my favorite character in the script, and that's Dr. Lennox.
I love he's described as ratty. He's a ratty little man in a book. What a compliment.
Yes. But it's this wonderful performance from Cyril Shapps, where he starts off as basically put upon henchman, and gradually develops a bit of a spine with help from Liz, and has possibly just the nastiest death in all of Doctor Who because of the way in which this is never a guy who figures that any of this is going to work out right for him, and it doesn't. But the way in which he is killed off with with an isotope of radioactive nastiness in his cell there is just, again, it's so much of this, I think, is not just the script, but it's the performance and the direction that just combine to create this moment which is absolutely horrible and funny at the same time, because the look on poor the surprise and the look on poor Lennox's face of I'm so screwed.
Oh,
it's just this wonderful moment of television there, and Cyril Shaps plays it to the hilt, and it's wonderful to have a character who. One of the things you can do with a 7-parter here is you can actually have the characters do the kind of stuff that you do in modern Doctor Who, where one of the things Russell talks about in the writer's tale is turning a character so that when as they have subsequent scenes, you see new sides of them. You see them doing things they didn't think they could do before, and we get that with Lennox as he goes from just following along and feeling miserable about everything to being willing to quietly help Liz, to actually taking the huge risk himself, and then it still fails. But you can see how this character has moved beyond what you originally thought, which actually is one of the things that's kind of undercut a bit in the novelization. On screen, you gradually get hints of his backstory. Like, I adore that line where he says, where Liz says, "You were a respected scientist once." He says, "but grossly underpaid." And you get that, and it's like suddenly you know this guy. But the thing that Terrence does in the book, which I think actually weakens that a bit, is he explains who Lennox is when he introduces him. You know what his backstory is from the moment you meet him, and I found that less interesting than the sort of gradual reveal that we got in the that we got on screen. Actually, though, come to think of it, Terrence does the same sort of little capsule précis very effectively for Regan when he's introduced. I adore the idea that's introduced in the book that Regan was basically doing contract bank jobs for the IRA, and then eventually got into trouble with them because he was keeping more of the proceeds than he was passing on. I mean, that's an instant character sketch. It's one you don't get on screen. It's one of the few things I think Terrence actually invents for the novelization.
I think so, yeah.
And I just think that instantly gives you gives you a picture of this chancer.
Going back to Regan for a moment, he is always looking for angles as the story progresses. He talks about walking into Fort Knox, which has to be a lift from Goldfinger, and then he offers Liz a partnership, and we'll get to how amazing Carol and John is in a few minutes. And then, as you say, at the very end, he provides the solution and asks for leniency. So he's always looking for that extra angle. So the idea that he was skimming from the IRA makes perfect sense. And another point that I remember John talking about on RADW 30 years ago, and I wish my memory was as good today as it was for things that I read online once 30 years ago.
Well, I wish my memory of what I said was as good as yours is.
But you said the essence to Lennox's character is that he says, "I can leave anytime I want, ... but I have nowhere to go."
Yeah, that's a defining moment of the I can come and go as I please. I just haven't got anywhere to go. And I think it's like this is a human in the midst of all this sort of like action adventure cop show stuff. This is a guy who has been stuck in the midst of this. And I like that about this, because it's so easy to make Doctor Who sort of cardboard. And no, this is someone who doesn't have to be as for the story to work. He doesn't have to be as complex and interesting as he is. So it's pure bonus good characterization.
Well, he contrasts really well with Taltalion, who's completely into being an evil scientist. And Lennox is just hangdog. He literally, I think he just gets pushed around. Regan tells him what to do and he does it. Then Liz tells him what to do and he does it. So he's got no ability to kind of control his own movements or actions, if you like. He's a puppet. And it cost him his life in the end.
Cyril Shaps had this sideline in playing nebbishy characters on Doctor Who, all the way from Tomb of the Cybermen up through Androids of Tara. This is probably my favorite, and certainly it's the most screen time of his 4 Doctor Who performances that I can recall.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the implications of his death, if you think about what happened to American scientist Louis Slotin at the Manhattan Project when he actually touched the raw material of the atom bomb during an experiment, and he was dead within a matter of days, which I am pretty sure was a direct influence on the origin story of the Incredible Hulk. How Dr. Lennox must have died after opening that isotope. Terrence doesn't go into that, but there's probably a whole side story of absolutely gruesome, horrific, slow death over a period of 3 or 4 days that we don't even get to see.
You know, radiation doesn't work the same in Doctor Who as it does in real life, thank God. So, for example, the thugs that go into the back of the van with the radioactive aliens, they're just dead. They're not horribly anything. They're just dead, and he just throws them into the gravel. So we have to assume that the same thing happened with Lennox. He's just dead. Well, thank God for that.
Yeah, luckily for him, they established he is dead by the middle of episode 6. So,
yeah.
So he doesn't have a long, protracted, horrible thing there, but he's managed to die before he could actually tell anyone anything, which was the real purpose of that.
Yeah, so it must have been quite quick. So this is Doctor Who radiation.
Yeah, it's space radiation. Radiation.
Radiation.
Couple of more points to the story worth talking about. Michael Ferguson's direction and Carol and Jon as Liz. I know that Inferno is probably Liz's best story because she gets to play 2 characters at once. But she never gets a whole lot of shoulder-to-shoulder time with Jon Pertwee. And for me, she's almost the main character for large portions of the story. And she not only holds her own, but I think she's right up there with Lila Ward in terms of a companion who is literally the equal of the Doctor in the way they manage their own separate plot strands, in a way that poor Jo Grant really didn't get to do for most of her tenure on the show over the following 3 seasons. What do you guys say to Liz in this story?
I think the moment that defines Liz in this story for me was probably the bit in when she's being pushed around by Regan. He shoves her to a thug who gets spun around in a really neat bit of blocking by the director. And then she just looks up at the thug and says, "It's all right, I won't hurt you." And that's a Doctor line. That is a straight up Doctor line.
You're absolutely right. That's a Pertwee line right there. Or it would, if he was in that scene, he'd have said that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's not actually in the novelization, so it might have been Carol and Jon coming up with that. Because give me 2 seconds. I'm actually looking through the book right now to see if I can find the chapter in question there. But I'm pretty sure
that from the camera scripts, and we know there are some deleted scenes that are preserved in the book that didn't make it to television. So he probably would not have had access to the actors' ad-libs.
That answers my question. I couldn't work out whether he was working from the videotapes or from the scripts. But if he's got, like, for example, he describes the Doctor's lab, and it's exactly what you see on the screen. And that can't have been in the original script, surely. But if he's got the camera scripts and maybe the videotapes, because what is this, 1987?
It's 87. He could have.
So he's probably got the tapes as well if he wants them for reference. Yeah. So it's a bit of a mixture of different media that he's working with.
Yeah, that's actually one of the weirdest things, I think, in terms of how he's adapted this book here, is that, I mean, that particular room there, he provides this lengthy description of the room in which the Doctor is working on the TARDIS console, right down to the stained glass window on the wall, which is a set detail which you'd have to see there. He provides far more description of this than he does of Mission Control, where most of the story takes place. Oh. It's like he's seized on this detail and goes on for a paragraph or two of description, and that vanishes halfway through part 1, and we never get a single reference to while we're talking about the production side of things, the really neat Mission Control set, which is this incredible multi-level construction with different areas and technicians dotted all over the place to make it look huge and bustling, giant screens and every special effect that Michael Ferguson can come up with, and that's just totally glossed over in the book form there. But
it's not in the script, or it's not in the camera script or something, so it's not there.
But apparently the stained glass window in the Doctor's lab was.
It's quite a mixture of sources.
I don't know what he was on with there, but it was just really struck me.
So, Kate, as one redhead to another, where do you rank Liz Shaw in your favorite companions?
Oh, I love Liz. Liz is fabulous, and I wish that she had more time with the Doctor. She gets to be terrifically heroic in this because she keeps getting locked in that blasted bunker, and she is the hero of those sections. You know, fleeing, returning, constantly looking out for how she might be able to get out. coming up with stuff behind the baddies' backs. There's such a funny bit. There's what was the bit where when they're doing the bit with the evil suitcase that's going to explode and blow up Tartalion? It's really funny because they're standing there talking about the suitcase, and Liz is like 6 feet to the right. She should be able to hear the entire suitcase discussion that they're going to blow up the Doctor and, object or something. But Terence has said she couldn't hear the discussion over the sound of the laboratory generator. And I thought, nice catch. Solved that problem. Well done.
Yep. There's moments we can tell that Terence is still script editing, and those are always...
Yes. When it needs it, so... Also, her white boots are fabulous.
That also.
But I like that she's almost always in a scientific kind of environment with the Doctor, because that's what season 7 is always all about. She goes to, the nuclear power station. She goes to mission control, and she's absolutely natural in that environment and can function there. And, that's terrific.
Yeah, in a way, the structure of the story is what gives her the chance to do the Doctorish stuff. Because, what could basically be parking the companion for 3 episodes between when she's captured and when the Doctor is then captured as well there, they have really managed to build up a situation which she is puzzling out what is going on. And that is actually advancing the story, even if she is stuck in the one place. And she's puzzling it out without the Doctor around. So it actually gives her some space to breathe, not just having to come up with the same conclusions as the Doctor, or come up with them first to do the exposition.
Or follow what he's figured out.
Yeah.
And like he says, I figured out that we need to do X, so, could you go with some test tubes and do that for me, please?
Or do the complicated explanation, then he pats her on the head for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So she's in charge of those sections of story, and that's good. But it is a shame that she's not more, as you were mentioning, not more with the Doctor, and that we could have them discussing scientific stuff as equals or close to equals. And that would really show, she must be the world's leading scientist. She must be the number one scientist on this earth, and perhaps the number one genius of the earth, because with all of those qualifications and that ability to keep up with the Doctor. So, you'd like to see them having dinner and having a conversation. But, tackling radioactive monsters of Mars will do. Just like to hear them talk to each other. So
that's one of the things I think that they don't ever quite do enough with. As Kate says, the Liz in Spearhead from Space is established as having such a broad range of qualifications. And Carol and Jon is not nearly old enough to have gotten any of that many degrees at once, unless she was a child prodigy or something like that. There's a whole story as to how this young woman could become what is clearly an incredible all-rounder in science of all types. And I don't think they ever give her enough space to sort of explore that there. The idea that she would have to be not just a good scientist, she has to be a genius in her own right.
Yes.
And I hope someday someone will get her a chance to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's something I would love to see them do more if they explore Liz further.
Those are really good points.
Yeah. There was something about that I just thought of, and I just can't remember. Sorry.
No, you're good. What do you think? I'm looking at my cheat sheet.
Sorry, this is a bit you can trim out while I try to remember what I was going to say.
I did love Terence's line, Liz was too highly qualified to be anyone's assistant. There you go. That's pretty great. Even the Doctor's.
That's a great benediction. So before moving on to the next part of the episode, so Michael Ferguson directs 4 Doctor Who serials, and they're not always the best scripts. He directed Seeds of Death, which is another story that fell apart in production, and Terence had to write it himself. He directed The War Machines, which, even though it's short, it's not my favorite William Hartnell, but his direction is astounding. There's this story, and then his final story is The Claws of Access, which even he was not able to fix, because that is a script that bites off a lot more than it can chew and writes checks that the production office doesn't have the money to cash. But if you guys want to talk about some of the nice visual flair in Ambassadors.
Oh, there's so much. And in both that and in Seeds of Death, Michael Ferguson, he is a director who's not scared of using zooms. I mean, he that period in the 60s when crash zooms were in vogue, he knows when to use them. There's a wonderful sequence where as the as the transmission is blasting through mission control, they had to rig up a little electronic gizmo so they could cut between cameras that fast. I always thought it was some poor guy on a vision mixer going ABC, 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 hitting the buttons as fast as he could. But
how was he going?
ABC, 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 ABC.
Well, that's what I thought you said.
Yeah, because they were. I mean, if I recall correctly, you could have your camera inputs labeled with letters. I remember that much. I actually had to do some vision mixing back when I was a tiny child. So I remember trying to hit buttons, but I could never get that kind of thing going. Anyway, they had this incredible fast cutting, and then these huge series of zooms on people as they realized that the connection with the capsule has now cut out and it's dead. And I just remember thinking, my God, this is a director who will absolutely go for it. And I mean, you can see that even in Claws of Axos as well. I mean, if any story has been gone for, it is Axos. I mean, can you imagine Claws of Axos in the hands of, say, Paul Bernard, who did The Time Monster to less than spectacular results?
You know, a really great shot in Ambassadors is when the guy who's got the Earth Mover discovers the bodies in the pile of gravel. And instead of a huge zoom on the bodies, there's a huge zoom on the guy discovering them. And we completely understand, oh my God, is his reaction. But we don't need to see a pair of bodies to get that. It's such a clever reversal of what you might expect, and it's completely effective.
And it's also, I mean, he knows when to cut, because it's like you get the zoom and it's
instant cut instantly with somewhere else.
It doesn't hold on the close-ups.
Yeah, no, I love that bit.
Yeah, one of the other things is that he's also an extremely bloodthirsty director. As we were commenting we were commenting on how Terrence was toning down the violence and how they make the point that, I mean, Carrington actually says on screen, try not to kill anyone if you can help it. Michael Ferguson did not get that memo. There are a number of unit soldiers who fall who clearly these are not ooh, I've been stunned kind of shots there.
Ooh, I've been stunned.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, they're not.
So yeah, he's going for it. He is making he's making, I mean, I think this is too early for the Sweeney, which I name checked before, but he's doing this sort of special branch department-esque kind of, we're going for a straight up action sequence here, and I am not compromising. I'm doing this like I want to do an actual film. Even in the studio, he's cutting it like he wants it to be a film. So I'm just, I mean, I have always admired Michael Ferguson as a director, and it's great to get to see him playing with this. And it's such a damn shame that I don't think Terrence can capture that energy on the page.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the problem for writing the novelization, is that how do you put the acting on the page? How do you put the direction on the page? You can't. It's such a different medium. You have to use different tools to get across that energy.
Yeah, and even if you wanted to do flashy prose and like really draw attention to it through energetic prose writing there, I mean, that's not usually Terrence Dicks's go-to move in this sort of thing. But even if you wanted to, there's no space for that when you're trying to adapt a 7-parter. I mean, I was thinking of in episode 7, there was a long and again well shot action scene where they're raiding the isotope stores, and Michael Ferguson has a whole bunch of cuts, stunts, people running around there, lots of stuff to keep the energy level up as best they can in that episode, which I will agree with my younger self that they have run out of plot twists by that point and things just have to happen in a straight line. But Terrence has to squish that down to about 4 short paragraphs in this thing, because by now he's into episode 7. He is running up against his word count, and he's just has to sort of just basically it's just what happens as quickly as he can get through it.
I have a feeling that episode 7 can be cut down quite a lot in the novelization. Partly because it ought to be. We ought to be racing to the conclusion. But also because there's just, as we were discussing, there's just an awful lot of tying off of threads at that point. And so you don't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of time on that. You want to go bang, 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 this is fixed, this is dealt with, that's what happened to that guy, and we're done. But it may also be him looking at his word count and thinking, oh my God, yes. I'm running out of pieces of paper to type on. I need to finish up.
Yeah. I mean, I remember back when we did the Weng Chiang podcast back in the mists of time there.
Yeah.
And I remember noting that I thought I could, when I was reading through, I thought I could spot the exact page at which Terrence panicked about his word count. Because he went from expanding on scenes to suddenly in the middle of episode 4 of Talon, suddenly whole big chunks of dialogue start getting lopped out.
Yeah.
And you could sort of see him going, oh wait, I can't keep reveling in the descriptions like I was in the first part of that book. There,
Yeah.
I've got to get to the end here as fast as I can.
Mm.
So Ambassadors is a 16-chapter novelization. So that means 2 episodes get to have 3 chapters each. So episode 1 is 3 chapters long, and it takes up 28 pages of text. Episode 2 is also 3 chapters long, I believe. Episode 7 is only 2 chapters and exactly 20 pages of text. So Terrence front loads the story, definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, he's introducing places and people and concepts, so it makes sense that it's front heavy.
Yeah, I mean, he's having to introduce everything from the Doctor on down in that first episode.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised episode 1 gets tremendous detail. But then what struck me is how he as he's cutting these things down in the later episodes, there are a number of bits where instead of just like losing an entire scene, I mean, if I were editing Ambassadors of Death, I would actually have cut like some subplots or something like that there in order to allow enough space, like Terrence did in the Inferno novelization, which I still think is his masterwork of his later stories there. He was in Inferno, he actually cuts out one whole trip back to the real world Earth just to allow enough space for the rest of the stuff to breathe.
Yeah.
But here Terrence is much more likely to cut a few lines from a scene or part of a scene. Like there's a number of things where there's a case where the Doctor has a line, someone has a line responding to that, and then the Doctor has another line, like sort of building on or clarifying his first one. He would cut out the middle line and sort of squish them into one speech. Or my absolute favorite trim in this. I mean, as I said, there's large chunks where he will just summarize part of the scene, like the various technical details. Like I said in the episode 4 stuff, which is the shortest of the episodes, where he squishes a lot of back and forths and explanations down into just a paragraph of reported speech. Or best of all, there's the argument with Carrington in that one, where you can see Terrence get bored as you type. He gets partway through the scene where they're arguing with Carrington about the foreign agents, and he just says after a few more fruitless exchanges, as Carrington said.
Terrence is never shy about editorializing as he goes. I'll quickly amend. Episodes 2 and 3 are 2.5 chapters each. So the episode 2 cliffhanger falls in the middle of chapter 6. So that's how he accommodates the extra space. And then, of course, chapter 7 is micro size. It's funny with Inferno because in Inferno you have 4 episodes that take place in the parallel world. And there's a flashback to our Earth, and I think 3 of the 4 episodes. Terrence cuts out 2 whole flashbacks, which would have been about 10 pages of print, and he just summarizes it at the very beginning of the episode 7 material. There's a 3-paragraph, here's what you missed when we were in fascist Earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a line that I absolutely loved, where they've pinpointed where Carrington's broadcast is coming from right at the start. The Brigadier sounded as though he couldn't quite believe what he was saying, and he has to tell them that it's in an abandoned warehouse.
In London.
In London. And I love that. That's so cheeky.
Yeah.
So a little bit of editorializing there.
Yeah, I mean, I had a feeling that with this book here, there is a certain degree of Terrence going, my God, it's 1987 and I'm still rewriting the Ambassadors of Death.
I haven't escaped.
Yes. They're back again. But
we haven't even touched on John Pertwee yet, and this, of course, is his not counting Paradise of Death, which I wish I wouldn't count. This is his final proper novelization. So, Kate, I know that Pertwee stories were screening on ABC in Australia at a time when people in the UK were not able to see them. So I know there was a reverse tape trade from Australia to the UK so people could watch their Pertwee stories. But I also know that you spent several years growing up in Maryland in the United States. Would you have been watching these Pertwee stories on ABC, or were you watching our PBS package in the mid-'80s?
Let me answer this, and then I got to run out of the room and take a pill and run back in again. I didn't get to see Ambassadors of Death until 1986 because it wasn't part of the rotation of Pertwee repeats in the 70s.
Oh, wow. So
we got Spearhead from Space, and then that was all we got of season 7. So, that's a pretty good dose of season 7. But 85 or 86, they started to repeat everything that they could get their hands on, and that included the rest of season 7. So that was a revelation. And how it continued the themes of Spearhead from Space with the science and Liz, and but it's all on video now, and so forth. So what was your question?
Where you saw it. So
when you first seen it, was it in Australia or here?
Melbourne.
Yeah.
Saw it in Melbourne. I would have been coming home from work or work experience and catching Doctor Who that was on. Either that, I was coming home from the HSC or year 12 at school and watching Doctor Who. I think that's more likely.
Yeah, when Kate was up in the U.S. before then, they didn't have the Pertwee packages in Washington, D.C. yet. I think they were just beginning Tom Baker, I guess, when you were up there. So
I'm sure I did not see Pertwee in the United States. I'm sure I would have remembered.
Because I would have got Ambassadors of Death about the same time. 1986 is when we would have seen it. And our PBS station, sometimes they did the same thing as yours in that they would split the longer stories in half. They didn't show them in episodic form. What they would do is they would sort of randomly stop in the middle, roll the credits, and then show the rest of it the next week.
Oh, right.
But like a totally random editing point in that case. But in Ambassador's case, if I recall correctly, Channel 26 had just moved it to an afternoon time slot instead of their previous evening one there. So they basically could run it as a movie in the middle of the day, and they ran that one the whole way through. So I think I got the entire 7 parts in one go, and I remember being astonished that I was not bored by the end.
That is a big dose of Ambassadors of Death.
Yes, I mean when MPT tried that with the Web Planet at 11 p.m., I just perished. But getting away with Ambassadors was good.
New Jersey Network. So Channel 26 on my cable system got the Pertwee package in, I want to say, early 1985. So I would have been able to see the Pertwee stories in the spring and summer of 1985, to the point that when I went to my first Doctor Who convention in New York in July 85, I had already seen up through Death to the Daleks. The problem is, at the time, we only had one television that had the cable box to give us that channel. And if my parents were home on a Saturday night at 11 p.m. when Pertwee was on, in 85, I'm 11 years old, I wasn't allowed to have the TV. So I missed Ambassadors entirely its very first airing. It then would have come over to Channel 21, the Long Island station, in 1987, but I have no recollection of whether or not I saw Ambassadors. For me, this story grabbed me in 1990 when it came around Channel 21 again in July 1990, and that's when I saw episode 4 so many times. And that was the point when Ambassadors became one of my favorite stories, and I was singing this story's praises on Records Doctor Who a couple of years later with very little support from my friends and colleagues on the channel. So it was gratifying when Discontinuity Guide comes out in 1995 or so as a reaction to years worth of received fan wisdom. I think that its Discontinuity Guide is the first real bit of Doctor Who nonfiction criticism to really point out how good this story is when it's at its best. But since we're coming to the end of our scheduled time together, what I want to do right now is play a game. And this
Can
is
I
a
say
game
one more thing before we go off to the game business here?
Sure.
There's one thing that Terrence adds in the novelization, which I was absolutely delighted by, and I think Kate was too, and that's the way in which he doubles down on John Wakefield, Michael Wisher's reporter character, basically being this dead-on parody of James Burke. You want to talk about that, Love?
James Burke was the UK commentator who did the Apollo missions for the BBC. And Michael Wisher is wearing his glasses, although he's not really doing an impression of him. But you get the impression that Terrence was really irritated by James Burke's mannerisms. He spends about half a page rattling on about how annoying he is. And the doctor ends up turning the television off because of it. And it's recognisably James Burke, too. So I've always been a little bit of a James Burke fan, so I thought that was hilarious.
And it's so weird because literally during the midst of this story, since Apollo 13 was happening during its broadcast, in between episodes, you would have had James Burke commenting on what was going
Apollo
on.
13, yes, that's right.
That must have been surreal.
See, that's a bit of cultural context I don't have in the States because I'm not aware of James Burke. And if I knew that, such as from the DVD text commentary, I forgot it by the time we're recording. So this is news to me.
Well, there you go.
Well, it's just a lovely little touch, I thought. Anyway,
okay, anything else in your notes you want to discuss before we move on to our games?
Just let me quickly look at my cheat sheet again. I wrote down a whole lot of stuff about the outer space stuff because I'm currently completely obsessed with space exploration. I am currently completely obsessed with space exploration, but I don't know how much I would actually contribute by telling you that the novelization changes our space program to our European space program, which is probably referring to the European Space Agency, which was founded in 1975. There you go.
Unit dating.
Unit dating right there. I wrote down a lot of little bits and pieces. The only one that's really interesting is this one, that Ralph Cornish wasn't nearly so relaxed as he sounded, which I loved, because whenever you watch any of the people involved in the moonshot or whatever, they always have that professional calm, even if something disastrous is happening. And so Terence has caught that, but he's reminded us that's professional calm on top of probably panic. And that's why Ralph Cornish is so almost hypnotized in his performance. So I particularly liked that one.
Yeah.
Ralph Cornish famously enjoyed his time on this story so much that he came back the following week and just hung out during the production of Inferno.
Did he?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Ronald Allen just loved the whole thing. It was on the infotext, I think.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, good on him.
Yeah, he does a wonderful job just being the straight man through the midst of all this, and since Liz is not around to do straight man reactions to stuff, he's perfectly useful, and I'd love to see more of this sort of setting at some point. I just don't know if there's ever any chance that anything like that could be done. Oh well. Yeah.
Speaking of
It's quite
straight
funny
man,
that, like if you watch the Moonshot or you watch any of those things, even modern stuff, Mission Control has like 200 people in it, all with their own screens, whereas Doctor Who has to do it with one guy with an assistant.
that's right.
And two other guys behind the screen delivering lines. Yeah.
That's it. I love that. But anyway, that'll do.
Yeah.
I was going to say, speaking of straight man, now that we have more revelations about the Doctor's preferences thanks to the new series in Ncuti Gatwa, the Doctor and Ralph Cornish in episode 7 have the world's longest handshake. You can read a lot into that today, I think, in 2024.
Well, actually, I seem to
Do
recall.
they now?
Didn't Lance Parkin actually mention Ralph Cornish and his boyfriend in Dying Days? Or do I misremember that?
I will tell you about
Yeah.
Dying Days. I reread Dying Days a couple of years ago for the 8th Doctor Adventures Facebook group.
Yeah.
At some point in the Dying Days, one of the characters, I think the Brigadier, goes into the archives and pulls the file CCC, which is the production code for Ambassadors of Death, because Dying Days is about the Martian invasion of Earth. So whoever it is goes to the archives to pull the file about the last Martian invasion of Earth. And Lance's editorial comment at the end of the scene, well, that was a waste of 3 hours.
Naughty Lance.
Very cheeky.
Actually, that is one thing that I just want to say very quickly that I noticed on this last reread is that they do point out that, I mean, even though this is not in fact an alien invasion of Earth, the ambassadors, their race do seem to be pretty bastardly, aren't they? I mean, they're literally about to nuke the planet because of a couple of ambassadors being held hostage. So, I mean, you never know. Maybe I suspect that at some point someone will be saying Carrington was right.
Oh my God.
God, you can see how that would play now.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The Elon Musk General Carrington Truther movement.
Oh, God, don't get them started. I mean, I can just see a modern Torchwood take on this buried invasion. Oh, that's another thing that Terrence clearly plugs as a plot hole. On screen, it looks like John Wakefield is still transmitting when the aliens walk in and Carrington is screaming, "They're here! We're being invaded!" Can you imagine, I mean, how that would have played in the world? There would have been absolute chaos and panic because of that broadcast there. But Terrence has a line in underlining that, no, Wakefield has cut the broadcast before everyone comes storming in.
Thank God for that. Again, another thing caught by Terrence and fixed.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Took him 17 years to script edit this story. That's how long it is. All right, so John, I think you and I have played 20 questions on this show before. You get 20 yes or no questions to pick which Doctor Who story I have grabbed out of the archives. It is one Doctor Who serial between 1963 and the present. It is taken from the randomizer.net, which is a production of the Flight Through Entirety podcast. But since I have two of you on the show, I have picked one story for each of you. So you're each going to get 20 questions. You're going to alternate back and forth, 1-1, 2-2, 3-3. If you want, you can ask the same questions to try and guess your different stories, or you can ask different questions and approach this in different ways. But you have 20 questions to narrow down 60 years of Doctor Who to 1 week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, or however long your serial happens to be. Are you ready to play? And who wants to go first?
Just to confirm, this is 60 years. So we've got, so basically old show, new show, everything in between.
The randomizer has the entirety of Doctor Who programmed in, so it could be any story from 1963 to 2024. I know what the story is, but you do not.
Okay, all right, and as long as it's actually just a TV story, we're not going to have to deal with say audio dramas or something like that. We should be okay.
It is a televised story with a title, so you do not have to worry about guessing if it was a Decalogue or a Short Trips or a Big Finish bonus audio or
one of those mini-sodes that they did in the Matt Smith era.
I'm dizzy already.
It is not Pond Life. That'll be a free question.
Okay, so which of us should go first?
You go first.
Okay. Is it 20th century Doctor Who?
So John's question, is it 20th century Doctor Who? That would take us from Unearthly Child through the TV movie. And yes, John is correct. It is 20th century Doctor Who.
Okay, that's a start.
So now, Kate,
Ooh,
now
I'll
you
have
have
the
a
same
chance.
question, please.
You can copy Kate. You're going to copy John. So Kate is also asking the same question. Is it 20th century? So for Kate, the answer is no, it is not a 20th century story.
Well, this will be more of a challenge for me.
Okay.
All right.
You are, of course, free to pull the episode guide up on your phone, which several of my guests have done. And while you're doing that, John, what is your second question?
Okay. Is it from the 1980s?
No, it is not from the 1980s. So you have cut your available pool of stories by 1/3. You are now limited to a universe that is 1963 to 1979 or 1996. Kate, how about yourself? Obviously, John's second question is not going to work for Kate because the 1980s is invalid.
True. Okay. Well, I'm pulling up the guide. Okay. In my story, is the Doctor played by a white guy?
Yes, the Doctor is played by a white guy. So now you've narrowed down from 2005 to 2017. You've cut out about 7 years of the show.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, I guess the next obvious question is it from the 1970s?
No, it is not from the 1970s. You're doing this backwards. It might have been more advantageous to go in a different direction, but it is not from the 1970s.
Okay. Well, that's narrowed me down a bit.
Oh, wow.
I've done only about 50 stories, I think.
You're down to 1 decade and 1 year. And Kate, how about you?
Oh, wow. Wow. Just trying to figure something out here. Oh, gosh darn it. Okay. I'm just trying to think what we call the decade that goes from 2000 to 2010. Is that the noughties? Is this a noughties story?
If we're talking about the noughties, that covers Doctor Who from 2005 to 2009. No, it is not a noughties story.
Okay, so 2010 and onwards. Okay.
Correct. So 2010 to 2017, you're now in a fixed universe.
2017.
All right. My turn?
Yes, number 4.
Is it a Hartnell story?
No, it is not a Hartnell story.
Okay, well.
You're getting a lot of no's, but the no's are narrowing you down pretty impressively.
So
That's good.
they're useful ones. They're ruling it out. All right, so Kate's cunning plan is now frantically scrolling through.
This is now frantically scrolling through, trying to remember anything that ever happened in the universe ever. Please tell me, is it a David Tennant story?
No, it is not a David Tennant story. David Tennant was primarily in the noughties, but he did one story in 2010, so it is not End of Time Part 2.
Did one story in 2010?
End of Time Part 2 aired January 1st, 2010.
You smarty boots.
That's why you married me.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. See, this is very educational.
Okay. So let's see.
Oh, there it is, yeah. 1st of January 2010. Oh, God, that was a useless question. Huh?
Okay, let's see. Trying to narrow this down. We've got three. I've got 3 seasons worth of Trouton, and still let's stream again till I'll be extremely amused if it turns out to be. Let's see. Trying to find some way that can take out a big swathe of stories here. All right. Well, I'll just keep working systematically here. Is it from season 6?
So season 6 runs from the Dominators up through the War Games. Now, Dominators and Mind Rubber were made as part of season 5, but they air as season 6, so that counts for purposes of your question. Yes, it is a season 6 story.
Okay.
So you are down now to 7 choices. You could actually just go one by one and still win the game, but I'm sure you're not going to be that plotting about it. Kate, can you narrow it down as impressively with question 5?
Is there a male companion in the story?
No, there is not a male companion in the story.
Okay.
So you've now wiped out a couple of years or 3 years worth of Rory, so that's helpful.
I was trying to do something stupid like it doesn't have a "the" in the title, but that would be absolutely useless. So let's try to think something clever here.
Hey, Nardole counts as a companion, right?
You're right.
Sure.
Nardole does count as a companion, but Nardole is not in the story that I have in mind.
Oh, no, okay. Good. We're on the same.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of something clever and interesting rather than just plotting my way through this here.
Every story that televised in season 6 has a "the" in it, so that's not very helpful.
Yeah, I know. Okay, just something a little off. Does the story take place in part on Earth?
Yes, it does take place, at least in part, on Earth. It knocks out a large chunk of season 6 for you, because remember, the War Games does not take place on Earth, not in one moment.
Well, I was assuming that because we get that scene of Jamie going back to Earth at the end, that War Games could count as taking place in part on Earth.
That is a good point, but since I've already spoiled it, yes, it is not the War Games, so it is a story that takes place more on Earth than just one telecine insert.
So yes, it does take place at more than one scene on Earth. Okay.
Correct.
All right, so that's good.
That answer gave away more than it chewed. Kate, your question 6.
Was this story broadcast in 2015?
Yes, your story did air in 2015 on Earth, which is almost 10 years ago now, which feels like 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
John, question 7. You might be able to wrap it up right now, but let's see.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say, does the story feature spectacular Michael Ferguson crash zooms?
No, it does not. I'm going to give you credit. That is the best 20 questions question that has been asked on this show that I can remember. Jim Sangster is actually my official scorekeeper, and he has the archives, and he is not only my co-producer but my unpaid intern. He has all this stuff down as data points. I can't think of it. Maybe he can. I can't think of a better question than, does the story feature a Michael Ferguson crash zoom? But no, it is not a Michael Ferguson story.
Curses. Oh, well. Because I would have thought that would have been perfectly on topic for the podcast.
That would have been great if true.
Yeah. All right.
Was this story written or co-written by Stephen Moffat?
Yes, it was at least co-written by Stephen Moffat.
Okay. All right, so now I guess I've just got to ask the coup de grace question. Is it The Invasion?
Yes, it is The Invasion, which makes it this was a randomized choice. I didn't curate this, but it is another two-fisted, lots of film inserts, huge action set pieces on location, an actual full-size helicopter. The Invasion is, if not the father, it is at least the favorite uncle or godfather of Ambassadors of Death. So you are correct. It is The Invasion.
Yes, and it's also, I suppose, the story immediately after my 2 Lethbridge Stewart books. I mean, I even end up introducing things like the I didn't introduce the Hercules air transport they use in that story, but it does appear in my books. Gratuitous plug.
Well done, well done.
Okay, so now it's your turn.
Oh, do I have to keep going?
Yes, John has won. Now you can tie John, and you can both get it at 8. And years from now, you can say, "I solved 20 questions just as fast as you did."
Oh, all right then. Well, I will ask whether the master is in this story.
No, the master is not in this story.
Okay. Gosh. Was this story directed by Rachel Talalay?
Yes, it was directed by.
Talalay. Oh, try to pronounce it correctly,
Yeah.
okay.
All three of us have spent at least some of our lives in the United States, and Rachel Talalay is American and directed Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5.
Well, is it heaven sent?
Yes, it is Heaven Sent. So
Okay,
John
I
got
got
it
there
in
in the
8.
end.
Kate got it in 10. That is an above average performance for both of you.
Yay.
Congratulations. John
Well,
gets
you should
slightly
keep
more
looking at the
bragging
time.
rights. I will have both of you on again for a Sylvester McCoy book before this podcast wraps up. We'll play the game again, and hopefully next time Kate will beat John, so you guys can have one title
That'll be
each.
fair.
We'll be even, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was lovely there. And I mean, I was trying. Basically, my main thing was just I was worried that'd be too boring in narrowing it down there. So
Oh, right.
that was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah.
We will play the contest again, Time Lords, to coin a So, closing remarks. Do either one of you want to give a recommendation for something that you are enjoying in this crazy world of 2024, where Elon Musk is trying to invoke civil war in the United Kingdom, and where even crazier things are happening on one side of the U.S. presidential election? What are things that you are enjoying to take your mind off living in the year 2024?
We are watching, we're probably miles behind everybody else with this, but we're watching Three Body Problem on Netflix, and it's superb. Lots and lots of bricks to the head, which is what I want from my science fiction.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Kate's been having a ball with that. I've been going on a massive nostalgia binge and discovering a show that I loved as a teenager and had not seen really since then, called Werewolf, which I found on YouTube. The whole show is up there, and it's extremely 80s. By this point, it looks very synthwave, that very sort of neon trendy kind of look there. And it has been just an absolute delight to regress to the age when I was just starting out as a writer, and just looking at how stories working and going, my God, this is actually a good script. I feel like I could write for this show. Of course, it was immediately canceled, but then that's the story of my life.
I've seen you mention that on Facebook. I have no recollection of that show, even though I was in the States in the 1990s when that would have come about. What network would that have been on?
This was Fox in like 1987 to 88. I mean, literally, when I was just first beginning to think I could write properly, I was doing spec scripts for Star Trek: The Next Generation in its first year and Werewolf. Those were like the first things I tried writing for professionally. And then it ran for about a season and a half. It got killed but because it was a half-hour drama, which was rare at the time. Fox wanted to go for an hour. The producers didn't want to, so it didn't get picked up. And then it ran a few reruns over the years there, but basically has disappeared. And because of music rights issues, was never released on DVD. It's only out there on YouTube, and I just rediscovered it and thought, my God, for an action show from the 80s, this doesn't suck. So it would have been around the same time that I was watching Ambassadors of Death for the first time that I was also discovering Werewolf.
There you go.
Desperately trying to tie these things together.
Oh, well done.
And this is the side thing that I did for fun. I mentioned this before that I was doing some adaptation stuff that made me sympathize with Terrence Dicks. I discovered the spec script that I wrote for Werewolf.
Oh, wow.
A couple of those years ago. I thought, no, wait, this is how it should have ended. And I actually basically wrote a script for a show that was canceled about 30-odd years ago there. And then I started trying to figure out if I could adapt this into an audiobook type thing. So I have, in effect, had to novelize a script that I wrote decades ago there, and I'm sitting there going, "Oh, Terrence, I feel your pain." Fortunately, I do not have the length limits here, so I can gas on and do all the spectacular prose there. But I do know that there is something that I still have to watch the length limits to get to fit down there. So I keep going. No, I can't indulge myself here. I have to squeeze this all in and hold the sides. So yes, I sympathize with Terrence very much on the Ambassadors novelization there.
All right, John and Kate, thank you so much. This has been a ton of fun. I will put links to all of your material in the show notes. Guys, again, it's a night for me, morning for you, down under. Have a great time, and I will see you on this show before it concludes.
All right, seeing you.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Doctor Who, The Ambassadors of Death, by Terrence Dicks, televised as The Ambassadors of Death. Teleplay by Terrence Dicks, Trevor Ray, and Malcolm Hulke. Screen credit 2, David Whittaker. Televised March through May 1970. Paperback release date October 15th, 1987. Target book number 121. Cover artist Tony Masero. 7 months after it left Mars, there has still been no radio communication with the Probe 7 spacecraft or the astronauts inside it. Back on Earth, concern is mounting, and eventually a recovery capsule is sent up to rescue the astronauts. But when the capsule returns to Earth, it is found to be empty. As the Doctor and Liz investigate, they discover that the interior of the capsule is highly radioactive. If anyone was inside, they would surely now be dead. Have the astronauts indeed returned to Earth? And if not, who are these sinister, space-suited figures who stalk the countryside and whose very touch means instant death? The Ambassadors of Death is the one classic series story that everyone seems to apologize for loving. When I wrote my ratings guide review of the TV serial in March 2021, there were already 18 reviews posted. Almost every one included some variation on the phrase, "The conventional wisdom is wrong," or "much better than I was expecting." In the year 2014 DWM survey, it ranked a fair to middling 98 out of 241 stories. In the top half of the show, or towards the top of the middle tier. To quote from the Twilight Zone podcast, which, like Doctor Who literature, is sadly running out of stories and nearing the end of its run, which makes the continued apologizing for the story a bit odd. Stand proud, people! Ambassadors, remarkably in spite of its troubled production history, is able to allocate a memorable set piece to each weekly episode. A huge warehouse fight in episode 1, an even bigger attack on a unit convoy with a full-sized space capsule prop in episode 2. The ambassadors themselves show up in episode 3 and are a menacing presence, especially at the episode 4 cliffhanger, where director Michael Ferguson films one slowly walking out of the sun. Episode 4 seems to cram about 48 hours worth of story into 24 minutes, with characters like Liz and the ill-fated, ill-accented Dr. Tatalian getting lengthy subplots. The Doctor takes a rocket ship up into space in episodes 5 and 6. Houston, we have a problem. And episode 7 ends with the unit raid on the Space Center. That's a heck of a lot of adventure. And boy, is that adventure fun. Regan, who's not even the main antagonist, is the first bad guy in the Pertwee era who loves being a villain. He casually orders the execution of about a dozen characters, but when he offers jobs and a share of the loot to Liz in episode 6 and the Doctor in episode 7, I was so charmed that I kind of wanted both of them to take him up on it. William Dysart, who was great in the first half of the first episode of The Highlanders, gets 5 full episodes of screen time to shine. In a serial where side characters come and go, 5 episodes is a lot of real estate, and he brings a cynical yet breezy pragmatism to all his line readings. Even when Regan is taken captive in his final scene, he still manages to give the piece of advice that ends up saving the day. The villain you love to hate. Now, he won't be back, but Roger Delgado's master will fulfill that plot function in Season 8 and beyond. General Carrington's full villainy is not revealed until the episode 6 cliffhanger, but he's got an actual motivation behind his actions. The ambassadors inadvertently killed his comrade 20 years earlier, and he's now mentally ill and plotting a very impractical revenge. The Doctor allows him some dignity as he's led away at the end, which is not usually the fate of the bad guys in Doctor Who. There are some faults to the story. John and Kate and I covered these earlier. I think most of the faults can be attributed to David Whittaker's inability to submit workable scripts given the series' brand new format. It is David Whittaker's last TV work for the show, and following the Wheel in Space, which we will get to on this podcast sooner or later, it's unfortunate that he went out, in my opinion anyway, on one dud and one incomplete. There are a lot of seams showing between the earlier Whittaker plotted outline and the various episode drafts worked on by Terence and Trevor Ray and Malcolm Hulke. Minor characters come and go for no reason. Lots and lots of character pairs never even meet. Dr. Heldorf and Dr. Tatalian are both burdened with silly accents, Tatalian being alternately French or Swiss or English depending on the scene. The Doctor's closing suggestion to return the astronauts home using pure M3 variant rocket fuel is a horrible idea, as we learned earlier in the story that pure M3 fuel would cause the rocket to explode on liftoff. But Michael Ferguson's direction makes most of those faults irrelevant. Apart from all the great stuff that we talked about before, there's also a unit soldier jumping on a moving helicopter and then falling off and down an embankment, tear gas bombs hurled at motorcycle riders, and all done live on location, without special effects or significant post-production. Coming just a year after the limp, cheap splendor, quote-unquote, of the Dominators, these two sequences could easily be at home in any feature film. Per the DVD text commentary, it's Ferguson who suggested and co-wrote a lot of those stunts. As a side note, Episode 7 of the story is notable for having more Doctor Who villains on screen at any time than we'd see again until the Five Doctors, really. You've got Michael Wisher, the future Davros, you've got Geoffrey Beevers, the future Master, and then you've got John Abineri, the future Ranquin. Okay, I didn't say they were all great villains.
Crow! 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 Crow rose from the deep to protect us, his people. Let us give thanks to Crow.
So Ambassadors of Death, for my money, is not the weakest story of Season 7, not even the second weakest, and I will never apologize for loving it, in spite of what the year 2014 DWM poll says. I honestly can't think of 97 better stories. Which brings us to the book. The last of the Jon Pertwee adventures to be novelized, The Ambassadors of Death in print is slightly hamstrung by being limited to what is now standard size target length, 144 pages, but the book starts on page 7, so it's less than that. Terrence Dicks crams in 7 action-packed scripts worth of incident, but has to cut corners. In order to fit everything, the episodes 1 through 3 material are given the most space and fare the best, with Terrence working in his trademark script-fixing exposition and wry observations, but things become noticeably more rushed during episodes 4 through 7, with long dialogue passages condensed into single exposition paragraphs, and action scenes going by in just a few sentences. Now, this is not a bad book. Can't be. Not when it's based on Ambassadors of Death as written for TV, by mostly Malcolm Hulke. Heck, even if the source material had been bad, and it's clearly not, I think Terrence is constitutionally incapable of writing a bad book. The opening paragraph is a typical Terrence bit of minimalist beauty, painting the widest possible word picture in the minimum word count, page 7, quote, far above the Earth, in the infinite blackness of space, 2 metal capsules were converging. My co-producer, Jim Sangster, has been investigating the origin of that phrase, the infinite blackness of space, and so far has it traced back to the 19th century, so not created by Terrence, but as John and Kate and I joked earlier, you need to start with a good quote, but it needn't be your good quote. Beyond the poetry of space, there's enough observational humor to make even the more compressed action fly. The character John Wakefield on TV is renamed Michael Wakefield, a possible nod to Michael Wisher, whose longtime association with Doctor Who began in this 1970 story. That's a nice moment, if that's what it is. In addition to paying tribute to Wisher, possibly, the description of Ralph Cornish in Chapter 1 is almost certainly a love letter to Ronald Allen. Cornish is described as, quite literally, tall, dark, and handsome, and radiated confidence and reassurance. Less loving is the description of Cyril Shapps' Dr. Lennox as a, quote, balding, ratty-faced little man. Oh, snap! And Terrence provides a clear narrative storyline to the warehouse fight scene in Episode 1, again one of Doctor Who's most technically impressive fight scenes ever, to make up for the absence of Michael Ferguson's carefully staged and directed visuals on the printed page. For example, giving us a logical and sympathetic explanation as to why Carrington's soldiers never actually managed to kill anybody. The book seems based on the camera scripts rather than the Ferguson-directed video because it restored some dialogue that the DVD production notes told us were cut for TV. So in the Episode 3 material, General Carrington refers to the alien astronauts as ambassadors for the first time. We know this is a scripted line that was cut for time during pre-production, and as a result, on TV the title term doesn't get used until Episode 6. Ferguson also intercuts several scenes for narrative flow, which necessitated the removal of scripted dialogue to avoid duplication between those parallel sequences. In one case, this removes a minor character, who as a result doesn't get to appear on TV. But all those directorial changes are undone for the novelization, and that deleted character, a non-speaking courier, is restored. Well, if you need him. The Doctor also gets a sharp line about democracy, which was similarly cut for TV, but would have been a wonderful bit of Pertwee authority baiting had the actor gotten to deliver it. Terrence throws in additional detail by way of exposition, mixed in with the stage directions and camera scripts that he copies over to improve the narrative. Jon Pertwee showed off his Royal Navy bona fides with a commanding officer yell at General Carrington's sergeant on TV in Episode 2.
Looking after you all right, are they? Had a cup of tea?
Yes, thanks.
That's good.
Sign of attention when you're talking to me and call me sir!
Just as I thought. Sergeant, aren't you?
Soldier. Are you a deserter?
No, he's acting under orders.
In the book, Terrence adds that the Doctor learned this parade ground rasp at Waterloo, which obviously would not have been part of Jon Pertwee's life experience, well, that we know of. The Doctor, while waiting to get through decontamination, after returning from space, wishes for, quote, a few dog-eared copies of Punch to read. Who knew the Pertwee Doctor read Punch? Dr. Heldorf, played in 2 scenes on TV by German-accented actor Gordon Stern, is given a tragic turn, well, more so considering where his character winds up, as we learn that he had been a refugee many years ago, and his voice still held traces of a foreign accent. Now, for me, that almost certainly codes Dr. Heldorf as a Jewish refugee from the Nazis, which again impacts his early death later in Episode 3. He is killed on the orders of Regan, who's also given a biography, as John and Kate pointed out, an IRA bank robber who was, quote, keeping more of the proceeds for himself than he was donating to the cause. The DVD notes say that the Irish link was cut to avoid a heavy topical subject, but it works just fine in the book, especially a couple of decades later. Lennox is also given a single-sentence backstory, hinted but not explained on TV, although I wish Terrence had the space to have gone even more into that. Towards the end of the book, when Terrence is rushing, the back episodes get only 2 short chapters apiece. There are still moments of his trademark magical descriptions. The lead alien, when revealed, is, quote, humanoid with a body, a head, arms, and legs, but it wasn't human. And Terrence never misses an opportunity to both highlight and cover up a plot hole. Somehow, he remarks, tongue planted firmly in cheek, Regan had obtained all the necessary passes to admit him to the Space Center's decontamination area. Sometimes, unfortunately, the rush to finish the book on exactly page 144 detracts from the narrative. Without Ferguson's visuals, Terrence has to have Liz Shaw reflect that the astronauts look sinister, which is not quite as effective as seeing them walk out of the sun and towards the camera, a trick that Ferguson used to similar great effect in The Seeds of Death 1 year earlier on TV, but this time in color. That's an unfortunate case of telling, not showing for the book, but all is forgiven when Terrence manages to quote Casablanca on the very last page. Quote, not that the contact was likely to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Casablanca is one of the greatest movies ever made. Duh. Currently ranked number 47 on the IMDb Top 250 list, and when I wrote the original version of this review for the ratings guide in March 2021, it was also number 47, so it has not dropped in all this time. And Casablanca has also been on the list every single day since literally day one of that list, peaking at number 4 in the year 2000. And yes, I do believe Casablanca belongs on the list of the 250 greatest movies ever made, and Ambassadors for me as one of Doctor Who's best TV serials, currently ranked number 6 on my own Top 60 for 60 list, the second highest Pertwee. And given the episodes that have aired after I wrote that list, I can safely say that Ambassadors has not been bumped down yet by any of the 13 that came out in 2023 and 2024. So putting a Casablanca quote in the Ambassadors novelization really is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Almost as beautiful as this friendship could have been.
Now you see, the main vault is here, and our friends there can blast it open.
Look, how many times must I tell you? I am not joining you in a program of bank robbery.
I'm offering you an equal share, Doctor.
Next time on Doctor Who Literature, we are going to go 1 month out of order. We are going to cover the December 1987 book first and the November 1987 book a week after that, just based upon my upcoming travel schedule and guest availability. Next week, December 1987, we are dipping back into the Patrick Troughton era, and we're going to talk about a very touching and realistic story about giant crabs. And then we'll go back to Season 3 and the William Hartnell era, and we will discuss, while I am in the United Kingdom, a story about what a massacre the Doctor Who production team may have made of a particular John Lucarotti script. That's Doctor Who, The Massacre, which cannot quite be called the novelization of the TV story of the same name. And those are the next 2 weeks on Doctor Who Literature. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer of this podcast is also next week's guest, David Barsky. The podcast is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guests, Kate Orman and John Blum. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages and keep listening to Dudley Simpson.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.